We had been to Betsy, we had been to Floyd, we had been to Camille. But when Katrina hit, we knew it was going to be a hurricane. We didn't know the severity of it. We didn't know that we were going to wound up back home in it. We decided that we would leave out on Sunday, thinking that we were going to drive straight to Nashville, Tennessee to see my brother, let him see his mother he hadn't seen in a while, and my grandkids. So we had my 3 grandkids, my cousin Hyman, my mother, and we were driving to Nashville, and we thought we were going to just drive straight through. When it got to be apparent that my mother was so sick prior to getting in the car that the road trip would kill her, we turned around, and on Sunday about 3:30, instead of going home, we went to the Superdome. When we got to the Superdome, the lines were so long, I knew my mother wouldn't be able to stand up in those lines, so I asked a police officer, where could I get her in? So he said, go around to the back of the Superdome. They had what they call special needs set up to take people who are in need of medical attention, as she was. And when we got there, they weren't prepared, so they said, go back home. If we would have known going back home would have resulted in their deaths, then we wouldn't have done it. But we went back home because that's what we do. You either survive in your house, you either hunker down, as they say, but we were going back home with the intentions of leaving.
The city went dark. It went black. When all the lights went out, then I knew I needed to go. We didn't have television. We didn't have no way of knowing what was really actually going on. And what we were getting off the news was pieces of things where people going to the Superdome, and they wasn't saying that the whole city was underwater in the beginning. So we were here when bodies started floating. I'm in the water. I got a staph infection and everything because nobody told us that was in the water. People's bodies floating, and had been time to leave, but I didn't know that. So we walked out past the water, down to the convention center, got airlifted from there, went to Tennessee, from Tennessee to Atlanta, from Atlanta to Texas, and then back to New Orleans. Like you say, within a year's time.
We were supposed to leave to go to Atlanta by my husband's sister, but his aunt and his uncle worked at 2 of the biggest hotels down, on Canal Street. So he was like, well, we can just go over there until the storm pass over. We're not thinking that it was going to be a catastrophe. So we went to the hotel to stay, August the 29th. That morning, early morning, is when Katrina hit, right? So the power and everything went off at the hotel. So with the power and everything going out, they told us that they can no longer house us there because it wasn't sanitary to live there. So they bused us to the Superdome. So we didn't actually go into the Superdome, per se. We slept on the outside. We slept there for maybe that day after Katrina. So the 29th was Katrina. So maybe the 30th, they brought us over to the Superdome. And then we stayed on the 30th, so maybe the 31st or something like that. Then that's when the National Guards and everything came in, and the buses came and all that kind of stuff. So we didn't stay long, thank God, but it was very, very, very scary. They bused us to Houston. Okay, so we didn't stay at Houston, not even a day. We got there, but my husband knew someone. He saw someone in Houston, and from Houston, they brought us to the airport, and we got inside the airport, and we were going from airline to airline to see which airline would be able to, work with what I had, because I didn't have much. And So it was American Airline that helped us. They took the little money that I did had, and they said that they were, pay the rest or whatever, but we had a layover. So we had a layover in Dallas. Now during that layover, we stood at, I forget what hotel it was, but we stayed at a hotel. And during that time, they was broadcasting everything about Katrina and stuff. And just so happened, we saw the picture of my husband holding my son on the news saying that, that the refugees, because that's what they were calling us then, refugees. From the layover, we went to Atlanta, which where we were supposed to go from the first beginning, where his sister was. We went to Atlanta, and while we were in Atlanta, they gave us a hotel there to stay. So we stayed there for maybe a month. After that month, they gave us housing. Well, after that, I did a whole lot of traveling within that 1 year. I went from Atlanta to, I believe it was, to Austin, from Austin to Houston, from Houston to Texas. Well, from Houston to, not Texas, I'm sorry, from Houston to, St. Francisville. St. Francisville, back to Houston, from Houston to New Orleans. And that was all in the span of a year.
It started on a Saturday because that's when I left. But the day that Saturday, I had a gun buyback at St. Philip Church in the Ninth Ward with Reverend Johnson and his daughter. So we was doing a gun buyback at the time. And then my wife, at the time, she, was getting ready to pack up to leave and things like that. So we had left that Saturday. And it took us like 20 hours to get to Texas because of the traffic and everything. So, it was my daughter. My oldest daughter, she was pregnant at the time. And I had my baby daughter and also a niece. So we had traveled to Texas, and where we reside in Pasadena, Texas. So we was up there for 3 years. And, during the time, but me having all females, for me, it was just to stay focused, to stay calm for them. And we lived up there I stayed up there for 3 years. It was an experience, a horrific experience. Something new, something different. I always thought about leaving New Orleans and relocating and everything like that. But you always make excuses to do it. But when Katrina came, you had no choice but to make that move. But then at that time, it became what you call survival mode. And I refused to come back at the time because I had 2 young girls. And I know at the beginning of New Orleans, in the process of rebuilding, that everybody in New Orleans at that time had a predator state, because it's kind of like every man for himself now, because we're trying to regroup. And what everybody went through, it was horrific for everyone.
When we actually evacuated the Superdome, there were 5 buses, and around those buses they placed armed guards, and if you didn't have a band on your wrist, you couldn't get on the bus. So fortunately, we were able to get on the bus, and here, me and my granddaughters and some other people that I knew from out the Ninth Ward drove from New Orleans to Lafayette. And when I got to Lafayette, my brother worked for Travel Centers of America. He was the general manager. So I had to leave my granddaughters with their aunties who were actually in Houston at that time, and got on the plane to Nashville. And when I got to Nashville, I told David, my arm hurts too bad. So I literally went from the airport to the hospital, from emergency room to emergency surgery, and they were actually going to cut my arm off because that's how bad it was. And they actually cultured, this was at Vanderbilt University, this was in Nashville, Tennessee, who I make recognition of the simple fact that Nashville is a place where we wound up. And they're called the volunteer state, and they volunteered. They stepped up to the task of taking in people. but you still had these situations where people felt like we were refugees as opposed to survivors. We were American citizens, we were taxpayers. So the refugee was a word that I didn't like, but refugee was a word that they used, in it. But Nashville provided me a place to actually be, a place to start over again.
They knew that it was a catastrophe that was going to come. So they should have had it planned better. And people were just trying to survive. They wasn't really looting and all that they were saying, but people were really trying to survive because they didn't have no means of nothing, no means of transportation. They in so many feet of water and, just not knowing of, where they're going to be at tomorrow, if they're going to be dead or not, So I feel like the government failed us.
And when I got back to New Orleans, nothing was here. There was no grocery stores like talking about it. There was no jobs to be had. Nothing was open. Nobody was here. We were walking around still trying to figure it out. I left trying to figure it out. I came back and had to try to figure it out. The government dropped the ball, period. The state of Louisiana didn't have a plan, which they should have. How many storms does it take before you get a plan? Bessie and Camille should have taught them what was needed for this city in case it got any worse, in case we got a direct hit, which we still didn't get. Katrina was not a direct hit. That happened after they opened up the levees. You see what I'm saying? So y'all did this to us. Your plan was to wash out the poor neighborhoods and save your precious Canal Street and St. Charles Avenue where the money was. Some people who had never been homeless found themselves homeless without a place to come back to. What do? Who do you turn to when you don't even know where your family at anymore? I've got people that I've never seen anymore, never heard of anymore. I've looked for them online, put their name in all of the bases and all of those things. They just disappeared off the face of the earth, more or less. But you have to go forward. You can't stay there in that place of them being lost. What you do with that? So, and I'm sure that I'm not alone in that people just lost people, didn't get a chance to bury them, did not get a chance to say goodbye, have no clue if they're still alive or if they're dead. And it may be they just have not been able to connect again. Or it may be that they're washed out to sea. They got drowned, they lost their lives. In so many cases, we just don't know.
So I know a lot of our people that was displaced have not had a chance to heal because they were not around like-minded people who shared their experience. So that was one of my primary reasons I helped and worked with him for over these 20 years to help it grow and develop so we can eventually get the March of Katrina second line to a point where everyone could come back or know the date and when it's going to happen so we could come back and heal and meet and greet and talk about people who shared that experience. Because when you think about it, a lot of people have been gone but have never been back, so they had never had a chance to exchange and share that experience with people who've done it. They're living on and moving on with their lives in other places. But the trauma here and the trigger is here, so when you come back here, you're gonna have a trigger when you're in New Orleans that we're not aware of, so because we have so many subliminal triggers that we don't know why we're in the state of mind that we are. I mean, I understand, but everybody doesn't. So that's why we have a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of hate, because a lot of things have not been dealt with. And Katrina March's second line is a great avenue to continue to grow and to remind people of what happened, to give those people a chance to release and heal in their perspective.
2005, too many bled, too many didn't survive. Too many misled, too many didn't have a job. Too many fled.